Finance Committee meeting on November 29th. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chair DuBois.
Here.
Councilmember Philsott.
Here.
Vice Mayor Koo.
Here.
All present.
Great. First item on the agenda is oral communications. Are there any members of the public that want to speak?
No members in person, and I don't see any hands raised.
Great. Okay, so we'll move on to our first action item, which is discussion and review of the audit of the city's financial statements.
I believe we have Adrian McCoy, our interim city auditor, here to kick us off.
Thank you. Good evening to the committee members and staff. Hope all is doing well. My name is Adrian McCoy and I'm the interim city auditor. One of the responsibilities of this role is to assist management in the coordination of the annual audit activities. I am here to introduce MGO, the city's external financial auditor, who will present an overview of the work performed as well as the results. Next slide, please. In accordance with the city charter, the city council shall engage an independent certified public accounting firm to conduct an annual external audit and report the results of the audit in writing to the council. And that will be a presentation this evening. Next slide. The purpose of this activity is to obtain reasonable assurance that financial statements are fairly stated. And for this particular fiscal year, we do have unmodified opinions across all reports. The financial statements were prepared in all material respects and comply with accounting standards being used as well as applicable regulation. There is one audit report that typically takes a little bit longer than the others, and that is the single audit. And the anticipated completion date for that audit report will be January 2023. And at this time, I will turn things over to David Bullock, the partner for MGO, and he will present the financial results.
Great. Thank you, Adrian. Good evening, members of the audit committee. David Bullock here. So glad to be back. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a new contract for the audit, and this is year number 1 under our new contract. And I've been the partner on the engagement for a long time under the first 2 contracts. And a few years ago, I rotated off the engagement. If you're not aware, California has a law that requires auditor rotation for the partner for more than 6 consecutive years. And that was passed in the state back in 2014. So I think I rotated off in 2018 or 19. So this is my first year back, and I'm happy to be back at the city of Palo Alto and working with the staff and working here with the audit committee to meet this evening. So I do have a presentation. So I think if you don't mind, Adrian, can I share my screen? Okay. I'm assuming everybody can see this. I'm presenting this evening the results of our 2021-22 audit. And as Adrian mentioned, the scope of services, the focus this evening is on most of the deliverables that we're responsible for presenting. The first bullet here is the main financial statements of the city, the citywide financial statements, which is often referred to now as the ACFR, or the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. We've also presented opinions on the cable TV franchise statement of revenues and expenses, the Public Improvement Corporation, which is primarily issuing debt on behalf of the city, the Regional Water Quality Control Plant financial statements, and finally, the appropriations limit, otherwise known as the GAN limit. Those are all completed and presented here this evening. And then the final item there, the single audit, as Amy mentioned, it is a lot of work. And typically the single audit, which is more of a compliance audit than a financial statement audit, is driven once the financial statements are done. Once the numbers have settled and we know what the total revenues and expenditures were related to the federal programs, and then we assess which programs need to be audited, because the programs that are audited depend on how much was spent each year and whether or not they've been audited in past years, with any findings and other things to take in consideration. So the single audit's a little more involved, and that'll be probably started in January with expectation of delivering that report sometime in February. So that's the timing of the single audit. And the deadline for that, by the way, is March 31st, 9 months after the fiscal year end. So the purpose of the audit is to provide reasonable assurance that the amounts are fairly stated in the financial statement. So that's the purpose of the audit. The framework that we use for financial reporting and accounting is generally accepted accounting principles. For the audit, we use generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. So there's two sets of auditing standards. The government auditing standards really don't replace what we call GAS, generally accepted auditing standards. They supplement it, and they supplement it in areas of auditor independence. They supplement it in areas of internal control reporting and compliance reporting. And so there's a secondary report that we'll be issuing with the single audit that reports on whether or not we identified any internal control deficiencies or non-compliance. So as far as the results go, so for the basic financial statements, as mentioned earlier, we expressed a modified opinion, and that just means that we didn't have any exceptions to financial statements. So we agree with how management has presented the financial statements. We did include an emphasis of matter, and that relates to a new standard that was implemented during the year. And so that new standard revolved around the reporting of leases in the financial statements. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we do a highlight of the ACR. The other reports that we issued all had unmodified opinions, so we were in agreement with how those financial statements were presented, and we didn't see any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control, and we didn't report any non-compliance. So those are all good results for an audit. And then we're expecting to complete the single audit sometime by end of January or maybe February, but that'll be after the new year. What I wanted to do, just jumping over here, is highlight in the financial statements. And I don't want to steal the city's thunder. I know they plan to go through the financial results of the financial statements. There's a couple of things I wanted to highlight for you in the report. And what I want to highlight is areas where there's changes or something significant. And I think that's just beneficial from understanding how things change from year to year and what you might want to focus in on. So there's really three things that I wanted to keep it quick. Three things plus the audit opinion. So the audit opinion, three things I want to highlight. First of all, the audit opinion has changed significantly. So if you compare this report to last year, you would see some significant changes in this report. And this is the part of the report that we're responsible for. We're responsible for expressing an opinion on the financial statements and really providing the basis of that opinion and responsibilities. And so that's what these 3 pages that we prepare, that's what they do. And what's changed is the opinion is now on the first section that you see. So, rather than having to hunt for the audit opinion in the middle of the document, it's right there in the very first section of the report. And this is where we say that in our opinion, the financial statements are fairly presented. And then we talk about the basis of the opinion, letting the reader know what standards were followed. Then there's an emphasis of matter. And that's what I explained earlier, that the city implemented a new standard this year, and there were some material changes to the numbers. And so we want the reader to understand that there's been a change during the year. And then we talk about management responsibilities. And probably I can make this a little bit bigger and easier to read. My apologies. We talk about responsibilities of management. And this isn't new, other than we've added a section here that talks about whether or not management has any concerns about financial stress. And if there were financial stresses, any doubt about the city's ability to continue as a going concern, we would be required to disclose that fact and put disclosures in the financial statements. Happy to report there's no concerns in that regard. The next section is the auditor's responsibilities, and that's been beefed up a little bit talking about our responsibilities and going as far as talking about some specific areas, including professional judgment, identifying risks of material statement, and so forth. So there's some additional representations or responsibilities, I should say, on what we're doing as the auditors. And then the next couple sections just let you know the amount of responsibility we're taking for some of the other areas of the report. There's a lot of information in the ACR. It's not just the financial statements, but there's MD&A in the report, which the MD&A is very helpful to understand the context of the numbers, but we don't express opinion on the MD&A. We look at it for consistency with the financial statements, but we don't express an opinion. Then there's supplementary information in the back. And here we're talking about some of the combining financial statements. And we talk about an in relation to opinion on those. And then we talk about other information, which includes the introductory section that has the transmittal letter. It includes the statistical section, which has a lot of 10-year trend information. We don't express opinions on those. And this is the government auditing standard. So I just wanted to walk you through this opinion because it's now 3 pages long, whereas in the past it was probably 2 pages and didn't have all of the information about responsibilities included. So there's information there. The other things the 3 things I wanted to highlight in the financial statements are the new lease standards, created a leases receivable category. That's about $6 million now between the governmental activities and the business type activities. And on the liability side, because in addition to leasing properties that the city owns and equipment, it also is a lessee for capital assets. And there's about $9 million, maybe closer to $10 million combined there that is now recorded on the financial statement. So there's some new liabilities, some new assets on the books. And so I wanted to highlight those changes. The second thing I wanted to highlight was the pension liability. So as you're probably aware, the city utilizes CalPERS for its investment plan. And the way pension reporting is presented is it's presented 1 year in arrears. And the reason it's 1 year in arrears is in order for the city to close its book timely, it can't wait for CalPERS to finish its audits and gather the information necessary to present the liability on the plan in your current financial statements. Otherwise, you'd have to wait till January or February to get that information and then close the book. So it's just not timely enough. GASB recognized that, allowed for a 1 year in arrears presentation where you can present the pension plan 1 year in arrears. So this number, this $344 million is a decrease from the previous year's liability of 460 plus million. So there's a $120 million decrease in the net pension liability. And that's really a result of the investment returns that CalPERS experienced through June 30th, 2021. I did want to let you know that that's expected to change next year. We don't know the numbers yet for June 30th, 2022, but we do know the investments didn't perform as they did in the past year, and therefore there will be an adjustment. So we'll see how that reflects in the numbers. And CalPERS made one other change. They changed the discount rate from 7 and I think 1.5 basis points to 6.90 basis points. So there is a change there in the discount rate, which will have an impact on liability as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. That was a big change this year. The OPEB experienced improvement as well in its position, just not to the extent that the pension plan did, but the OPEB liability went down about 40 million. And then the final thing I wanted to highlight, which was a significant change, is the investment losses. And so you may have noticed that there were some significant investment losses during the year. And that's really a result of the market. And the city has a large investment portfolio, and most of that portfolio is in compliance with the city charter and with California government code. And because of that, the city's limited on the types of investments, which is really typically fixed income type securities where there's a really low risk of losing principal. Things like federal agency notes, let's just say. And because the interest rates have gone up, and you may still be in some of these notes that are maybe interest rates that were prevalent a year ago, the city is experiencing some not realized but recognized losses on those investments Now, the city's plan or the city's policy is to hold till maturity. So the city really is not going to experience any investment losses, but you have to reflect the fair value of those investments at the reporting date. So if the city did sell off any of those investments, you would experience a loss just because the markets, the interest rates on those types of investments have gone up in the market. And so this is a loss that you have to recognize in financial statements. The expectation is that you won't have any losses of principal. You just won't experience the investment returns that the market is giving on these current types of investments until they mature, and you can recycle those and reinvest those money into new investments. So those are the three big changes that I wanted to highlight this year, which is a little, a little bit different than what you may have experienced in past years. But again, the city's going to go over the financial results, and I'm more than happy to answer any technical questions on those areas if you wish. The last thing I wanted to cover is just the what's listed in the packet as a management letter. And it's really not necessarily a management letter, it's really a communication to the audit committee. And this communication provides additional context to our audit that you don't see in the financial statements. What you see is our auditor's report, which has our opinion, but you don't see a lot of the underlying communications and activity that have occurred between us and management during the year. And so that letter communicates any changes in accounting practices. It also talks about, and there's a lot of estimates in the financial statements in order to close the book timely. There's estimates made, and those estimates are highlighted in the accounting practices. We're also required to disclose any difficulties encountered during the audit. I'm happy to report there were none. Whether or not there was any corrected or uncorrected misstatements, and there's none to report this year. I think the city did a great job closing the books, and we didn't have any corrections that needed to be made. There were no disagreements with management. Management provided a representation letter at the end of the audit. There were no consultations that we're aware of with other independent accountants, and there were no other audit findings or issues to communicate. So we've communicated these items in that separate letter to you so that you have that information and you're aware of anything that may have transpired during the audit that's not necessarily included in the audit opinion. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and make myself available for any questions you might have.
Great, thank you guys. The view I have of the conference room is really from a distance. So Lydia or Eric, you guys have questions? Why don't you go ahead? I'm not sure I could see your hands.
I thought I might interject. This is Christine Cross, Assistant Director, ASD. It would be, if it's the pleasure of the committee and the chair, staff is recommending that we hear items 1 and 2 together to get that full view picture of the financial results. So we'd like to put that on the table for you to consider.
Okay, I did have a few just audit related questions, but I don't know. Eric, Lydia, did you guys have anything related to the audit?
I don't have any questions on item 1.
Lydia?
I don't either. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Bullock.
Yeah. So just super quick, then we'll go on to item 2. First of all, Adrian, it's good to see you. That's the first time you've been with us. And David, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to see you as well.
Thank you.
And maybe, I don't know if one question I had was, you had this lawsuit settlement around the Goon case, and there are some assumptions in terms of, I think, redemptions and refunds. And did you guys look at that as part of the audit?
Yeah, we, I don't have a recollection exactly of the results, but yeah, we as part of our audit, we look at all claims activity during the year. We confirm with both the city attorney and any external attorneys that were used during the year. We get a summary of the outstanding claims that are over a certain dollar threshold to get a perspective of any loss contingencies that are out there. And so we go through that process, and we make sure that that the financial statements include a provision for any losses where there may be a probable loss that it has occurred by the reporting date. And so I'm it sounds familiar. The audit was done more than, it was done more than a month ago, and I've already been on a couple other audits. So I don't recall exactly the resolution, or if it's still in process for that specific case.
I was really curious, like if you guys look at, how we model what we expect. I think people will have to file claims. Is that right, Kylie? Like, are we basically modeling what we expect people will actually collect?
Thank you for the question, Chair Du Bois. And I'll also ask Assistant Director Paras to help me with this. We have, as Mr. Bullock alluded to, the external auditors look at claims and potential liabilities at a certain dollar value magnitude. In addition to that, the city commissions an actuarial study on all claims against the city. It's done by an outside firm. We do it both for workers' comp and general liability. And we use that study to identify what the lump sum liability that we place on our books are. You'll often see that in the general liability fund and the workers' compensation fund. And for those, we also ensure that we reserve enough funds in accordance with a certain confidence level. Just like you said, how much of these claims do we think will actually materialize? The current city council approved policy on that is to assume an 85% confidence level. So let's just say you had $10 million worth of outstanding liability on all claims, to your point, that may have been submitted to the city or not. The actuarials will look at those, determine based on our experience as an organization, kind of what our potential liability is, and then we reserve 85% of that.
Okay.
Is that
Yeah, so that's
responsive?
our process, and then the auditors basically agree that that's a good process.
Right. Yeah, and we look at the actual valuation, the assumptions used in it, and then, but on top of that, there could be, specific known cases that could present itself after the study. So we don't rely solely on that. We do other procedures to make sure that the claims, any kind of losses, are complete. But we do, and those claims are the ultimate loss claims. They include attorney fees and all other expected losses and any incurred but not reported losses. So there's a provision in there for losses that the city doesn't even know about yet, because it's experiences that people file claims 1 or 2 years after the actual incident, and so there is a whole process to the development of the kind of the expectation of what the ultimate losses are. And what I was mentioning before with the attorney letters is on top of that. So we look at the actuary that does that calculation, ensure that there's rules that we follow when we rely on a specialist outside of just the accounting techniques that we use. And so we look at the actuary, we look at the process, and then we look at known claims and discuss those with the attorneys, just to make sure we have a good understanding of what total exposure the city has as of the date of the financial statements. We actually have a policy that we have to have the attorney letters updated and not within 2 weeks of issuing our report. So we've gotten all those representations through November from attorneys.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this was 17.5 million. That's why I was asking.
Okay. And that
questions.
And that 17.5 million is recorded in the financial statements currently as an estimated claims loss. So that's already been recognized as a liability.
Right. I noticed we're still doing auditing around landfill, and it was just really a question for how long will that continue? That landfill was closed years ago, so I don't know if there's a time frame
And
we no longer.
Yeah, I think there's laws regarding environmental laws regarding that and the total amount of time where it has to be monitored and taken care of, and so those losses, that expected payable cash flows is estimated well after the closure, considered post closure costs, and we rely on the engineers and so forth to project those out and ensure that the city records the liability in regards to that exposure. But I don't know what the, yeah, how many years out is required to be monitored. It's at least 3
Then
years.
okay, that's helpful. 30 years. Last question was really just my understanding around the wastewater treatment plant. So maybe I wasn't quite reading it right. So, you know, Palo Alto had the largest expense, even though Mountain View uses more of the plant. Is that because we handle the other agencies within the Palo Alto portion? So at the end of the day, we actually end up paying less in Mountain View. It was kind of like the report was two-tiered. There was like Palo Alto, Mountain View, Los Altos, and then it looked like Stanford and East Palo Alto and some of the smaller agencies were coming out of Palo Alto's share.
Yeah,
This is really either to you or to Kylie. I'm not sure.
that would probably be best answered by the city, but you're right. The city has expanded its services to include other entities and then direct bills them for that portion, I believe. And so it's not just Palo Alto that's covering that cost. There's
Okay.
all those kind
So
of,
even though we're less than half of the plant, at the end of the day, our expenses match that, right? Because it looked like we were paying more than,
because it's,
again, Mountain View, who
I
uses
believe
less.
because it includes more than just Palo Alto, and then Palo Alto recovers it from the other entities. So together, Palo Alto together with the other entities should be the amount that they're responsible for covering within the member agencies. But I think probably the you know, that level of detail would probably be best explained by the city.
If I may, I believe the partner share versus the city share is based on outflow and a number of different parameters that the Public Works Department calculates, and is also written in our joint powers agreements with each of these agencies.
Yeah, exactly. And we're less than Mountain View, so I expected our expenses to be less. That was really my question. But they were more. But then it looked like maybe there was like a two-step thing where, like I said, some of the smaller agencies came out of our portion afterwards. I was just trying to confirm that's what was going on.
Right. So just to kind of, I guess, affirm what you are asking, Chair Du Bois, the contractual relationship amongst the partners is slightly different just because of the JPA and when the JPA was established, plus the additional, for lack of a better term, partners. But I don't want to use the word partners because there's obviously some level of separation in terms of the JPA and the original establishment of it, and then the subsequent relationships. So there are ultimately, to your point, more than just those three entities using the services of the wastewater, and the accounting is based on how those contractual agreements are flown through. So you are correct that we have relationships with, I believe it's 5 entities amongst that, but because of how the contractual relationship is slightly different based on when that JPA was established, we accordingly reflect that in our financials, since we are the parent organization that is reporting on those financials and delivering the services.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. So I think we can go ahead and move on to item number 2. You guys want to pick it up?
Thank you, Chair. I'll turn it over to Rosalind Fernando, our finance manager, to present the ACFR results. Rosalind.
Good evening, Finance Committee. I'm Rosalind Fernando, Finance Manager. So tonight we are here to present the fiscal year 2022 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, or what we call ACFR, and budget adjustments. And as mentioned previously, the audit was completed and we received a clean opinion or unmodified opinion from MGO. Another thing, we just received the fiscal year 2021 Excellence in Financial Reporting from GFOA, and we will be applying the same in fiscal year 2022. Also, the ACFR is now posted on our website. Next slide, please. The first financial statements presented in our ACFR is the government-wide financial statements. So there are 2 activities here. We have the business type activities and the governmental activities. This is, by the way, on page 33 of our ACFR. And the basis of accounting for this is full accrual. The city's net position for this year ended at 1.27 billion. It is an increase of 40.6 million or 3.2% from fiscal year 2021. And the 40.6 million is coming from governmental activities. There's a 51 million increase, and business type activities, there is a decrease of 10.4 million. The net impact is 40.6 million citywide. This is the summary of the statement of activities. The first two columns would be the governmental activities, which is the 2022 and 21. Revenue is 220 million, functional 189, and the transfer in 20.3 million. The change in net position is a positive of 51 million. And when you compare this in 2021, we could see in 2021 there's a deficit or a change in net position of negative 17.4. Looking to this closely, the total revenue, 198.1 million last year, 220 this year. There is a net increase of about 21.6 million. The reason of the 21.6 million is the first one would be the 8.2 million ARPA fund allocation that we recognize as a revenue this year. We also receive a 25.2 million donation from the Friends of JMC, but this is in the form of the JMC, the renovation of the JMC building. And another reason of the increase would be the major taxes. Taxes are much higher this year as compared prior year. However, this is partially offset by the unrealized loss that was discussed by David previously. And functional expense decrease, mainly due to the pension expense and OPEB expense. As previously stated, the pension liabilities decrease. That means there will be also a corresponding decrease in our accounting adjustment, specifically in compliance with the GASB 68 and 75. That would be the significant reason why there are variances between 2021 and 2022 for governmental activities. Well, for business type activities, revenue is 346 million, functional expense 336 million, transfer out 20.3. So there's a change in net position of 10.4 million. The variance, we'll discuss that in the change or in the enterprise section later. Here's the component of the net position. As I mentioned on the first or second slide, net position is 1.27 billion. But please note that 92.4% is already in the investment in capital asset, meaning that it's no longer available for spending. And 6% is restricted, while 1.6% is unrestricted. Please note that in 2021, the investment in capital asset is 1.123 billion, and there's an increase of about 51 million, 1.175 million. So this means that the 40.6 million increase is already tied up to investment in capital assets. The next financial statements that is presented in our ACFR is fund financial statements. That is in page 37, I believe, of our ACFR. The fund financial statements, there are two. Same thing, we have the governmental funds and we have the proprietary funds. Proprietary funds includes the enterprise funds and the internal service fund, while the governmental fund includes the general fund, the capital project fund. And the basis of accounting, just to emphasize that, proprietary fund is full accrual, while the governmental fund is modified accrual. Modified accrual is almost the same with the budgetary basis. And that's also the financial statement that we present quarterly to the Finance Committee. For the governmental fund, there is 327.1 million this year total. This is a 38.5 million decrease. The decrease is mainly from the capital project fund due to continuous construction of various projects. The big one is the public safety building. 15.2 million decrease from other funds. And there is an increase in the general fund by 24.5 million. Please note also that the governmental fund is 27.1 million, but 18.67% is the only amount for the unassigned fund balance, which is about, I believe, 69.1 million. And focusing to the general fund ended with a 72.8 million budget stabilization reserve, or what we call BSR. This is an increase of 23.7 million or 48.3% from fiscal year 2021. While the proprietary fund reported a total net position of 796.8 million, a 10.4 million decrease from fiscal year 2022. This slide is focusing with the budget stabilization reserve. As we mentioned, the actual BSR is 72.8 million. However, if you compare that with the projected BSR that was included in the assumption in the fiscal year 2023 adopted budget, it was 54.7 million. There's a variance between the two. It's about 18.1 million. And the reason for that is due to the higher revenues than expected, and there are also expenditure savings. And this will be discussed more in the next two slides. But let us focus first with that 72.8. 72.8 is 29.4% of the adopted budget expenses. However, after uses of about 30.1 million, our BSR projected level is 59.8 million. And this 59.8 million, there's still a surplus of 40.2 million compared to the council target. And the city and the staff anticipates to return to council next year around Feb with the recommended mid-year budget adjustment. I believe this includes some transfer to infrastructure and transfer to pension 115. These are the reasons why the projected BSR is lower than the actual, or the other way around, actual is higher. So we could see here that the total revenue were 26.6 million above budgeted levels. And the big variances are coming from documentary transfer tax and TOT. For the TOT, just to clarify that we have an occupancy rate that was 63.5%, a 57.4% increase, while the average room rate was 194.89, a 69% increase. And so we could see that most of the major revenues, I guess all the major revenues are higher than the budgeted amount. And this is the expense savings of 5.6 million. So in most cases, I think all the department, the actuals are lower than the budget. And this is due to vacancy savings and lower expenses across the departments for internal cost to run the city. This is just the history. This slide is just discussing about the history of the general fund revenue. We could see here that before pandemic, just focusing to the major taxes, the totals are the major taxes. Before pandemic, fiscal year 2019, major taxes are 132.8 million, while fiscal year 2022 is 136.6 million. Please note that sales tax, TOT, UUT is still below pre-pandemic, but property tax and documentary tax are higher than the pre-pandemic level. And this is the actual expense also of the general fund. This is on a budgetary basis, meaning it includes the encumbrance and reappropriation. For this year, it's a 14% increase from prior year due to higher salary, benefit costs, and indirect charges. Next slide, please. This slide is for the enterprise net position. Fiscal year 2022, we could see a 12.6 million negative. And if you compare that with the 2021, it's a 22.2. There's a decrease of 34.8 million. And the major contributor of the 34.8 million, the first one is the water fund. The water fund, there's a decrease in revenue, mainly due to the conservation effort due to the drought, while electric fund is due to the higher electricity cost due to the lower hydroelectric supply, resulting also to the higher energy prices. Thus fund, there's a decrease due to the higher commodity prices, and all other funds decrease are mainly due to the unrealized loss that was recognized by the city in fiscal year 2022. While the airport, the increase is 1 million. This is mainly due to the federal grants. So that should conclude the ACFR result. And this slide is for the fiscal year 2022 year-end budget adjustment, which is in our attachment B. These are just a technical adjustment across all funds types to minimize variances. And the major adjustment are the net zero realignments in the general fund between departments and the capital project adjusted for actual revenue and expenditures. This still maintains overall council approved total project budgets. Recommended action for tonight, staff recommends that the Finance Committee forward to the City Council for its approval the city's fiscal year 2022 ACFR and amend the fiscal year 2022 budget appropriation ordinance for various funds in the attachment B. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Should we go to council discussion? Lydia or Eric, you guys want to start?
I'll try one anyway. Documentary transfer tax. Why do we any color on why that was higher than expected? I remember there was one year a couple of years ago where there was basically one large compound transaction. Was it like that this year, or was it a lot of little things?
I believe recollecting, and Taryn can correct me if I don't have it right, there were a couple material large commercial transactions this year that led to that.
As opposed to an upswing on residential caused by people moving to different places during the pandemic or something like that. It was commercial. Mm-hmm.
Saw Tarun come and go. I don't know if he was going to make a comment.
Well, they did generally cover. I mean, the residential was they had robust sales, but there was like they said, there was a handful of large commercial sales. Documentary is a volatile revenue because it's solely dependent on the activities and sales, and a few large sales can put us over the top, which is what happened in 2022, which was a record receipt. The prior year was a record, but 2022 beat that record.
On TOT, I mean the increase, I mean the recovery of TOT, was that sort of proportional during the year, or did it was it back? Did we suddenly a whole lot in the last part of the year, or was it spread out?
The TOT recovery actually been at the latter end of the prior fiscal year, the 2021. The 2022 was basically the performance throughout the year. So there wasn't one particular month, but it's just a general recovery.
So just continuing recovery. Okay.
Yes.
That's good. That's good.
Yes. The latter part of 2022 is when it began, and it just continued the full year of 2022.
So, and then to add some more color on that, and Taryn can see it in some of the seasonality of the tables when we look at this, because we do receive it on a monthly basis. When you look at April, May, and June, the latter 3 months of the fiscal year, it's uneven, but it's a slight higher pace of growth than the prior months. I'm not surprised. Often our TOT has seasonality to it. So there's obviously probably some of that in there, in addition to the recovery aspect, right? That's when graduation's happening, both visiting the graduation as well as having time, frankly, off. So that's another aspect that we didn't necessarily see when we brought forward estimates in May, when we were doing the budget.
So maybe just a couple of comments for me and jump in. Overall, it looked like a pretty strong recovery. I do think it's worth noting that the unrestricted amount of money seems to be some of the lowest in years. So if you look at that trend over the years, it's really kind of narrowed down to the 20 million. Kylie, you look like you're.
I was going to say, Councilmember Du Bois, what 20 million are you referencing? Is there a slide?
Yeah, there was a slide in terms of the unrestricted dollars that aren't allocated. Like it used to be quite a bit larger, 10 years ago. So it really means there's like not that much wiggle room. Everything's committed, right?
That's correct. Yes.
And so there's been this trend to kind of having smaller amounts of unrestricted funds, I guess. And then if I read it right, overall, when you take all the city's assets, buildings and everything, liabilities, overall, we are in the red, right? When it's like $100 million in the red when you include unfunded pension liabilities. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. From a citywide perspective, that's correct. And there are significant accounting adjustments for pension and OPEB that are included in those assumptions.
Right. I just think it's worth noting, even though we have $1 billion of assets. And then I did notice the budget adjustments all looked pretty minor. It looked like we missed the public safety debt payment. I guess we didn't put it in the budget. Is that right?
I believe that's a timing issue of just when the bond year and the payments came due. And that was something that we had identified when we issued the debt itself, just based on when the debt was issued.
So going forward, will it be in the budget? So it won't be an adjustment?
Correct.
Okay. The one thing I thought might be worth talking about on the finance committee was really the BSR. And so we have this $14.2 million surplus. I think there was a proposal to put some in the 115, some in the infrastructure, and then some into an economic uncertainty reserve. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So it seemed like a reserve of a reserve. And we have this target range for the BSR. We don't have to be precisely at 18.5%. So maybe staff could say, like, why not just leave, if we think we're still in economic uncertain times, why not just leave it in the BSR, which is a budget reserve?
Absolutely, we could do that. That's a call for a council policy perspective. City Clerk, if you might bring up one of the slides, it was the one that was specifically on the BSR. Oops. Thank you. So to your point, Councilmember Du Bois, you can see the 59.8 million there. And actually, if you look at that compared to the footnote at the bottom, where the BSR was projected at the end of the year to be at 54.7. So we really are only 5 million off from what we used to develop the FY 2023 adopted budget. So to your point, this committee could recommend to council just to leave it at that higher level instead of trying to target it back down specifically at the 18.5%. The 115 trust and the infrastructure reserve are both, obviously, I think as this committee knows extensively, are both areas that the council has policy that any excess BSR be transferred. to 50-50 between the 115 and the infrastructure reserve. So we are in a time where staff is being careful about tying up the funds, and if it's cleaner or it's the wish of the committee just to leave that 5 million in the BSR and stay above the 18.5, that's a policy call and completely appropriate.
Yeah. So this is totaled up a little bit differently, right? So, at the top there we have 14.2 million surplus to get to the 18.5. And then that table is assuming that portion, is that in the 9 million there, that half of that is infrastructure and half of that is section 115?
No, actually the table, if we want the full table, it would be on bracket page 63 for this evening. Let me find that really quickly.
Yeah, I guess where's the 5 coming from versus the 14.2?
Yep. So of course, there's multiple ways of looking at the budget stabilization reserve. And when the council approved the 2023 adopted budget with an estimated BSR of 54.7 million, that BSR was above the 18.5% council target. The council, when we went through the budget process, brought forward, I believe, something of about 14 million in additional one-time funds as part of the 23 budget process. The council ended up not allocating all of those funds during the process. As you can see, about 9 million were used as part of the budget balancing strategy. So the BSR was above the 18.5%. So that's one variance. The other variance is, what does it actually take to get to the 18.5? And so that's what that $14.2 million is. So we know now, as we've closed the books at the end of FY 2022, based on what council's already allocated from the stabilization reserve through various actions, that we have 59.8 million sitting in the BSR. And based on the BSR policy, that's 14.2 million above the 18.5%. So that's the difference between the 5 million variance of what we planned versus the policy target of 18.5. Two different ways of looking at it, slicing the number.
Yeah. So yeah, I was looking at packet page 63, we have that table, and there was a suggestion of 5 million to go to the 115.
Correct.
5 million, right? So is that still the recommendation?
Yes. So that's how we would recommend bringing the BSR in alignment with that 18.5 based on the existing council policies. We don't recommend that you move the full excess of the 14 million to the 115 and the infrastructure reserve, given the uncertainty that we continue to deal with in the broader economic sense.
And can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, it seems like economic uncertainty is always with us. Like, why do we feel like it's more uncertain in 2023?
Sure. We are in active debate nationally and globally on whether or not we are in a recession or heading towards a recession, both as you look at, during COVID, it was supply chain issues, but now as you've got global impacts, gas prices with the conflicts that are going on abroad, are issues internally. So your inflation is at record high prices. And so as we are moving through rebidding of contracts, we're acknowledging that, frankly, some of our estimates are just not up to par with the pace in which inflation is going. You'll notice in this item number 3 tonight, that's one of the reasons why item 3 is before you. So one, economic uncertainty is just the unknown rise in costs and how long and how significant that will be across the various lines of service in the organization. The other uncertainty is obviously the idea of a recession where we see a dampening of growth in our revenues or even a fall of revenues if we were to see a recession similar to patterns previously. The third uncertain piece that kind of hear in the news is, are we moving into a new economy? These trends that we're talking about as a prior recession is based on how the economy was structured previously. A lot of economists are talking today, are we moving into a new phase as our how we consume services and goods has changed as a result of the pandemic? And what does that new economy look like as we move beyond it? So you are correct. We are always in an uncertain time. It feels like we have significant variables right now that we just aren't sure held materialize in Palo Alto. And I will at least say from a fiscal standpoint, one of my goals with the city manager and as an organization is to provide stability to this community and to the organization during this time. So making sure that our reserves are there to help bridge any uncertainty and ensure that the hard work that the organization and the employees and the community went through during the pandemic doesn't need to be repeated is a high priority and something on our mind. Now, whether the council wishes to establish that 5 million uncertainty reserve, allocate it to something else, or just leave it in budget stabilization reserve as a policy call, staff will take the guidance from the committee and council.
Okay. Could I share my screen, or could you pull up that page 63 just so we can look at that table? Do you want me to share?
Chair, the clerk can do it.
Okay. And while it's coming up, I guess the other question I had was, I guess the city manager had the authority to put it either into the infrastructure or the 115. Didn't know if this creation of this third fund was really in the authority. Could you talk to that a little bit?
The creation of a third fund wouldn't necessarily be in his authority if it was appropriated. That would need to be something that we sought council approval of. And so that's why we wanted to bring this forward as our recommendation for the allocation of these funds to see the committee's feedback to inform next steps.
Chair, may I ask a question? Is he still there?
Oh, did we lose Tom? Tom, are you there?
Oh, there he is. You're still muted.
Said, sorry, I of course lost you just right when you started to answer the question.
We're looking at the chart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, so what was the answer about the city managers?
The 5 million establishing and appropriating funds in an uncertainty reserve is a council action that would need to be taken.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So again, I just want to make sure Lydia and Eric, you guys saw this. And again, I'm supportive of the 4 million to the infrastructure reserve, 5 billion to the 115. I feel like creating a reserve of a reserve is just like a little not transparent. And so for me, I'd rather just leave it in the BSR. But curious what you guys think.
If I may, I actually, based on what the assistant city manager had said, I think it actually makes sense. And while it seems a reserve and a reserve, it does have a title of reserve for economic uncertainty. And I think it also brings confidence to those who work for the city and others that there is action in order to ensure that, we move forward in a prudent manner and responsible manner. So I think it brings some confidence for many of our contractors as well as employees. But I do have a question for staff. Why is Downtown Streets team here? I don't remember this, but why is it in the approved adjustments to the BSR?
If I recall, this was a budget action that took place in June, right before budget adoption. Oh, after. So I think
Yep, this has to do with the compliance with CDBG funding. and ensuring that the Downtown Streets team contract and services would be continued while staff worked on eligibility of formerly funded CDBG activities.
Okay. Thank you for refreshing my memory. Okay, that's it.
So we're going to see the long-range financial forecast in a week, I think.
It is already out in
It
the
is
packet.
already out in the packet, and I haven't seen it yet. Okay. So one thing that we did this year is, during the recession, we kind of put, everybody sort of pulled together and there wasn't a lot of expense growth in terms of wages and benefits, particularly some of the public safety and management professionals sort of led the way and, trying to be conservative on costs. And this year, we have reversed some of that. And, obviously there's been a big spike in inflation in the last couple of years or last 18 months. And, and much of the work that we've done on sort of wages and benefits has reflected that this year. Have you guys factored all that into the long-range financial forecast? Are you guys looking at some of the directions we went this year on that?
Paul or Jesse, do you want to take this one or would you like me to cover it? You want me to take a stab? All right. At a high level, what the long range that's out in packet for the committee's discussion next Tuesday, but it is publicly available on the agenda at this time for whoever may be listening. That long range looks at the restorations that the council did last year, and with the expected passage of Measure L, does model those across the 10 years. So the long range includes the full assumes those restorations across the 10 years. It also assumes passage of Measure L, which is a critical component of funding those restorations. The other aspect that you just asked about was inflation. So two thoughts on that. One, the near term of the forecast, so 2 years, the first 2 years, so FY24 and 25, have an assumed CPI of 5%, when we typically assume about 2.5 or 2 3/4. So we did up it in the long range for the first 2 years, and the outer years we resumed the 10-year average. On the labor side of things, the 1 year or temporary salary deferrals or even furloughs that were instituted are all back at whatever their whatever the salary levels are in the MOUs at present. And as we are going through the negotiation process, do reflect council's direction in terms of market placement and the like. But those numbers are obviously as of a few months ago, and we're actively in those discussions. So I would say we're not necessarily 100% trued up, but we are doing our best to keep things in sync. Once we are out of contracts, then it reverts back to the 2%.
Got it. Okay, I understand. So I guess the thing that's running through my mind, and this is something that people that actually, do this stuff for a living would look at is, coming out of the recession, we've had a spike in inflation, and I'm curious about the possibility that the way it impacts us, there's a timing difference between the revenue side and the expense side. That is, if you look at some of our jumps in revenues, particularly things like sales taxes, right? That might factor in the current inflation wave now, whereas the expense side waits through the MOU process and the bargaining process. And so do we think maybe we're going to see, we got sort of better than expected revenues and lower than expected expenses this year, but should we be anticipating, the expense side is going to catch up, right? Because people need to live, right? And so should we expect that, this is sort of a transitory thing, based on the timing of when we see inflation in the revenue side versus the expense side, and we should expect those things to go back together next year, right? So I'm curious whether staff thinks that's a likely possibility or has modeled that. Right?
Sure. I think the best The best way to describe this, as staff has been moving through modeling this in the forecast, is it's lumpy.
I'm gonna write that. Can I write that down?
Yeah.
So you are right. Our revenue streams are extremely diverse. Some react instantaneously to the economy. Others are on a 2-year drag. Same thing with our costs. If you're locked in a 5 or a 10-year contract, you may not see that inflation the moment you see it now, but you will see it when you bid it. So you see it in the capital projects that we're bidding today.
Right.
You didn't see it in capital projects we were bidding 24 months ago. So
Yeah, I would expect that capital bids on capital projects, you see that instantly.
correct.
Whereas, as you said, we're on the contract side on other expenses, and people expenses in the city are 2/3 of the general fund or something like
That's
that. So that's a
correct.
lot of the general fund that's tied up in long-term contracts.
Correct. So for lack of a better kind of description, it's uneven. And so we obviously are doing our best to manage through those bumps, because ultimately the goal is those are waves, right? And the goal is to smooth those out for the organization so that business can continue as seamlessly as possible.
Well, I like the idea of having a reserve for economic uncertainty that includes lumpiness uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right, if that
And
makes sense.
again, when you said lumpiness, I really thought it's waviness, and I'm glad you said wave. And I think
Right,
that was
it's
really
rippliness
Eric's
or-
question. Yeah, are the waves a little bit out of sync, but they're going to catch up? My point is just, I feel like it's not very transparent. We have a budget stabilization reserve, and just creating another reserve with a different name, I don't know if it makes people feel better or not. I mean, it's still money that's there in reserve to be used. But if you guys feel like putting in a separate bucket is what we should do, I'm okay with it. I just thought, why not leave it in the BSR?
Yeah, I sort of went back and forth a bit on that, but I kind of like the communication aspect of it. That's that we are anticipating some uncertainties going forward, and to be prudent, we ought to be prepared for that. And I sort of like the communication aspect of that.
Just a question. So if the uncomfort is about the word reserve, what does it have to be done in order to be a fund?
Well, again, we have lots of reserves, and so it's just like creating another reserve. That was just my reaction.
I see.
Council members, one thing that just came to mind as a difference, because this conversation obviously came up actually as part of budget deliberations maybe 24 months ago as we were going through the pandemic. The difference that I can think of, besides the communication and visibility of the funds between the BSR versus in a reserve, is actually something I think Council or Vice Mayor Koo, you had asked, which is council approval for usage of it. If it's appropriated in a reserve, not the BSR, if it's appropriated in a reserve, a programmatic reserve, it requires a majority vote of the council to spend it. If it remains in BSR, it requires 2/3. So because the BSR is not technically appropriated based on our charter and ordinances, and it takes a 2/3 vote of the council to increase an appropriation. Whereas if you were to put it in this reserve, a programmatic reserve, it then becomes appropriated, and based on those regulations, only needs a majority vote to move the funding. Again, at the will of the council, at the will of this committee, that was just a variable that came up when we had a similar discussion previously. I thought I should remind the committee of.
So are there any other questions or comments or motions?
Well, let me ask one more question on that. If it's in the BSR, to appropriate it from the BSR, as you said, takes a 2/3 vote of council. On the other hand, if the next budget in June of 2023 says, let's go back down on the BSR to 18.5%, that only takes a majority vote of council, right? It doesn't take 2/3. As the 2/3 thing only applies to mid-budget cycle. That's it. Okay, thanks.
I have,
Doesn't it take 2/3 to approve the budget itself?
No,
I
I
should
don't
know
think
that.
so. I don't think so. I remember 2 years ago, we had a very spirited debate that eventually went 4-3.
You think I would know that by now?
I just want to get some more clarification about the 40.6 surplus that was reported in one of our local papers. So can we kind of go through that a little bit more, so that, you know, the public kind of understands that, yes, it's great we have that surplus, but, you know, where is it? Can it be used?
Sure. Christine, you want to
Thank you.
assist us with that?
It would be great if the clerk can pull up slide 3 of the presentation.
That's the net change in net position.
Yes,
Okay.
and I think interpretation wise, the 40.6 was quoted in the paper as surplus, whereas it is actually, as you said, Councilmember Phil Seth, the change in net position and net position of the whole org does represent investments in capital assets, which on the next slide is about 92.4% of that net position, and other restricted funds. So just to be clear, that surplus, although it does look at things from total revenue minus functional expense, it is representing kind of the balance sheet as a whole for the org and that change.
I appreciate that.
I gave up arguing with Dave Price on this point
Yeah.
years ago.
Every time it comes up. But if you go to that
Every
next slide,
year it comes up and says, well, okay, if we sell off the utilities in the Magical Bridge playground, maybe we can get that. But otherwise,
yeah. If you could go to that next slide, though, that was the one I was talking about, kind of the unrestricted dollars, which I think is the more useful measure.
Yes, that was a good note, Chair DeBose, about how it's went down over the years since 2016 to now, that unrestricted funds represent only 1.6% of net position. So that was a great thing to note earlier.
Yeah, and part of that is that we are putting it into like things like programmatic reserves, where or is it actually completely restricted?
The restricted funds are in the orange, the 6%. So those are made up of page 33 of the ACFR, where they're restricted in transportation mitigation, public benefit, supplemental pension, debt service, and other activities.
Yeah. So like moving that $5 billion example into an economic uncertainty reserve, it's still considered unrestricted regardless.
Yes.
I see Kylie just nodding. Yes, no. Okay.
One more thing is, you know, it's a little bit the enterprise net position, right? That's on slide number 11. I mean, I look at that and I hear the presentation and what was said. Thank you. And it's a little bit concerning, you know, because, you know, with climate change and everything, we have a drought, yet it's costing us more. Right. And then there's the gas utility, again, less usage, but costing us more. So at what point is it not sustainable? So I guess, you know, I have worries about that when we're looking at this, and is there a solution at some point?
Sure. And thankfully, we have our full suite of utilities folks with us this evening, given the next item, which will actually start talking about this exact issue. They too are going through ripples, but to your point, it's a question of, are these true, are these kind of temporary or one-time occurrences, or are these new trends? And I think you'll find, as we discuss with the utilities team, that it's probably both. And that they are also looking at how to make sure that these utilities remain sustainable into the future as we look at long-term contracts. Again, we've got decades-old contracts that have certain things that are locked into them. How do we reevaluate those in the new, as we look to the future? So 20 years ago, we perhaps didn't realize exactly where we might be when we were locking in these contracts. And now we're at a point of re-upping. So I think it's an ongoing discussion that will be at the forefront as we move through the utility forecasts over the coming year.
Thank you.
Move the
So
staff
let's,
Well, yeah, I was gonna
yeah,
say,
let's see if we can go ahead and wrap up items 1 and 2.
so move the staff recommendation on 1 and 2.
Seconded.
Oh, public comment.
Oh, thank you. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak to either item number 1 or 2?
No members wish to speak in person and no hands are raised.
So we had a motion by Councilmember Philseth, seconded by Councilmember Koo, to move the staff motion for both 1 and 2. So if you guys could verbally, I vote yes. Eric
I vote yes.
and Lydia.
Yes.
Okay,
I
so that
wanted
passes.
I wanted to offer an amendment to change the name back to CAFR because ACFR is hard to say.
I know. I kept calling it
No,
for myself.
but I'm friendly.
Okay. So thank you on that. Thank you for everybody who attended for that. These
Thank
two
you very
items.
much. Thank you very much to staff and the auditing team.
So we will move on to item number 3, which is the hydro adjuster discussion.
Yep, we'll switch out staff. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Rosalind. We have Dean Batchelor coming, our utilities director, with Eric Keniston and team.
Good evening, council members. So tonight I am bringing to you the proposal for an increase to the electric hydro rate adjuster. Following up on a conversation we just had, a lot of what I'm bringing to you tonight is actually already been discussed, but I guess let's move on to the next slide and I can just do a recap. So the current hydro rate adjuster is designed to help us fund for additional power purchase costs when hydro supplies are low. One of the things that we have known and experienced is that when hydro is low, we have to go to market and market prices to be higher during low hydro times. We activated the hydro rate adjuster on April 1st, 2022. We had projected hydro output well below average. At the time, it was 310 gigawatt hours, and we average about 480. And we were also projecting that the hydro stabilization reserve was going to be drawn below the $11 million mark. We did that. We put the rate at the 1.3 cent level. And in FY 2022, that earned us about $1.5 million additional. However, as we've seen, FY 2022 purchase costs were about $16 million higher than what we had in the financial plans and estimated. And as of right now, the FY 23 is looking to be similarly as high. So we've taken the hydro stabilization reserves, 15.4 million, and drawn them down to next to nothing. We've seen the supply operation reserves are looking to be about 22 million. So on the next slide, this just highlights again when hydro is good, market prices tend to be low, and it just flips over the other way. Next. When we went to the UAC, we started looking at, we got the numbers for AFCR, and we're looking at where our ending reserves were going to be. When we had the financial plans in June, we were thinking, we might end about $33 million, and it turned out to be closer to $22 million after the additional higher costs. And as of a few months ago, when we went to the UAC, we had initial estimates of like maybe we'd be about $9 million higher. And that was bad. So we said, let's double the hydro rate adjuster. and bring in an additional $5 million, and maybe that would squeak us in above that supply operating reserve minimum guideline level of like right about 18.8 million. That's what we were thinking of doing. 2 months on, our purchase cost estimates continue to soar. And so, you know, in rates, I tended to drift a little bit between cautious optimism and henny penny. And at this point, I think I'm a little bit more on henny penny side and saying, you know, I would rather estimate and say, let's try to see if we can bring in a little more money, keep our supply operations reserves a little higher at the end of FY23 and going into FY24. And so I made so we changed our recommendation to increase the surcharge from 1.3 cents instead of to 0.026 or 2.6 cents to instead increase it up to 5 cents. That would get us about an additional $14 million and would help offset that additional, now we're estimating, call it a $16 million additional purchase cost in FY23. There's ranges. So this, I think, comes back and sort of describes what the impact of each one of these scenarios would be on a residential bill. So currently, monthly bill of $86.57 under the 2.6 cents would go up by about 7%. Under the full 5 cents, it would go up by about $18, be a 21% impact. But in all cases and scenarios, we're still well below where PG&E is, even with those higher rates. So with that, I think that we can go into the reasons why. Again, we're just seeing much higher purchase costs due to the drier hydro conditions. We're hoping that we get some rain. We're hoping that things turn around. I'm not being quite as optimistic. We've also seen transmission costs higher than what we had estimated. So, you know, just the full range of market conditions coming against us. And we just feel it would be prudent at this point in time to increase the hydro stabilization adjuster at this time. Move forward, I will say that we are investigating changing how we look at hydro rate adjuster. Instead of having it as a set, like monolithic value, I've been going out and looking at what other utilities have been doing, and there is much discussion going on right now in California amongst all the utilities. We've actually got a multi-utility rates meeting coming up in December, where we're all going to share our tales of woe. But there are some utilities that do have more flexible adjusters, either some as frequently as monthly, changing upon projected purchase costs, but most on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, but something a little bit more dynamic and fluid rather than, you know, something closer to like what is done with the gas when market prices adjust, that we turn around and immediately flow it through. I don't think in electric we can do something quite as dynamic, but maybe we may suggest in the future doing something a little more fluid to allow us to better work with the market prices that we're seeing around us. So with that, I will also say, and I would be remiss, and that yes, this is a different proposal than what we took to the Utilities Advisory Commission. Again, we recommended, and UAC also recommended a 2.6 cents, but after looking at how costs have been changing, staff felt it need to suggest something higher. So if this proposal is approved, we'll go back to the UAC and let them know what has been chosen. And I guess that wraps up my presentation for tonight. I look forward to any questions you may have.
If I could just add one thing to that, is that, you know, again, this is an adjuster that can be taken away at any given time. So if we start seeing conditions starting to change where the reservoirs are starting to rise, then we can lower this portion of it. The other option that we could have came, and we had discussed this, is do we do a mid-year full-fledged increase on rates? But at that point, we couldn't take that back. Now, maybe it'd be a little bit lower once we go to in June to all of you for approval of the budget. But in this case, this adjuster can go back to zero, or it could be lowered back to where it is today. But we're thinking, though, with the forecasts that we're looking at right at the moment, and with the precipitation that we're seeing it's very low in the reservoirs. We think that right now, this is probably the best thing that we could do.
Yeah, I noticed. I actually noticed that, which was the possibility of doing some kind of permanent structural rate adjustment, sort of in the belief that, well, we are looking at a new normal here, right? And so the rate adjuster is designed to handle blips, right? But if it's a permanent structural thing, then the rate adjuster is sort of not the mechanism, and that's the thinking behind this.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So council, any other questions or comments?
I got a couple, but do you want to do public comment?
Sure, if there's any members of the public that would like to speak.
No request to speak, Chair.
Yeah, I actually don't see any attendees at this point. So go ahead, Eric.
I was actually surprised that we're still as far below PG&E as we are, given that, you know, we're far more exposed to hydro than they are. Right. So I was curious why, why aren't we now like 10% below PG&E instead of almost 40?
I guess that just speaks to how shockingly high PG&E's rates are. Yeah.
Okay, I knew you were
More
going to say that,
solar.
right?
We have a lot more solar than they do.
Second question was, I noticed that staff's recommending alternative 2 and alternative 1 versus alternative 2 are like 4% apart. So how did that come about? What's the difference?
I mean, it was just, I guess, just to show maybe in terms of scale, if we didn't want to, how much additional minimum reserve would we like to try and have at the end of the day? Alternative 1 gets us some, alternative 2 gets us more. As a rates person, I think more is better. And if we turn out that things do get better and we end up with higher stabilization reserves, that just means that our FY24 rate increase will be, we can maybe do something lower, we can, or decrease. But as you mentioned earlier, what is the new normal? If our forecasts are showing that these prices are trending more towards the long term, then what we would do is that the hydro rate adjuster would be deactivated and we would move that new normal into our regular rates proposal. So there's that interplay. But if we see this as only being maybe another year-long phenomenon, things trend coming back down, maybe keep the hydro rate adjuster in play a little longer and still need to increase rates to cover not just longer run transmission costs, which we know are not going to come down, and an ongoing capital and whatnot and operations costs, but so there's that interplay that will come into play when we bring you the rates in February, I believe.
The other thing that we're doing too is that we're also looking at other types of contracts. This might be not the long run for us any longer. Where we're tied to about 50% of our overall power is coming from these 2 reservoirs. So we got to look at that as well, that maybe we have to offset and we don't take as much hydro in the coming years. And that we will look for something else, some wind, some solar, something that would kind of replace some of this. So we're not going to be in the situation for the long term.
I guess that was heading towards sort of my third and last question, which is much, a little more philosophical and strategic, which is, this is all inexorably tied up in our strategic decision to go to 100% renewable energy in Palo Alto, and we use hydro as it's 50% because it's our base load, right? And I'm not aware of anybody else that's gone as far down the renewables curve that we have that is using hydro as their base load, right? Because, the sun doesn't shine at night, right? Are there alternatives if we wanted to seek something other than hydro to be our base load?
I think that's a good question, Councilmember, because wind, you don't know when that wind is going to happen. You can say that, yes, solar is going to be good for us and that there's going to be storage,
Yeah.
but the problem is how much you're going to pay for that storage,
Sure, of course.
and so that's the things that we're trying to balance out is what really makes the most sense for us. This hydro is much cheaper than those two types of different type of powers between the wind and solar.
And battery
backup.
Right.
Yeah. It was just solar, it's fine, but again, like right now, we're not going to get anything off of that. And so I think that's the big question about which way do we really go. But maybe there's a better mix though that we can take a look at.
So it seemed to me that
Sorry, I was just going to add, Carla Daly, Acting Assistant Director. We are bringing forward probably a geothermal project. So that's one that makes a nice complement to our kind of bumpy portfolio right now.
Okay. Well, so it seemed to me that, it's kind of a highly constrained problem, right? I mean, if we want to stick with our 100% renewable strategy, then until we find some other alternative, some other 24/7 alternative that can handle half our power needs, we're kind of stuck with hydro, right? Maybe there's other hydro than our two projects or something like that, but unless we want to go back and revisit, right, the 100% renewable thing, or there's alternatives, right, to the 50%, then, we're kind of locked in at some level, right? And, we've had some really good years in the past where there was plenty of water and rates were really low. And that's part of the reason that and then the flip side of that is, with climate change, maybe, right? Probably, right? We're going to have some much more expensive years and there's no amount of rate stabilization that's going to fundamentally change that, right? I mean, it's just what it is. And it's almost like one of those things where, okay, there's some years we can roar with the lions, but then there's going to be other years we got to scream with the eagles, right? And so I think it is what it is, and I think it makes sense to go down this route unless we're willing to revisit the whole strategy. I think that the stabilization makes sense, or the hydro rate adjuster makes sense as a peak and valley kind of thing. So.
Well, so I thought we should, I'd like to understand a little bit more. I mean, we do set our reserve maximums to be something we think is viable. So what is the issue if we go down to the 18.8 on the reserve?
So, I mean, the benefit about having a higher reserve, that we sort of set those minimums based upon operating levels as well as, potential risks that we might have in the system. So like as we saw last year, it's very easy to go through 11, 12, $20 million in a bad hydro year additional. And we did have hydro stabilization reserves that we were able to use, but those are gone now. And, the worse the conditions are and the more that the market swings take you, could we go below minimum? Yes. But what would that mean come FY24 in the proposal? How comfortable are we? How low are we comfortable going, I guess?
Right. Not below minimum, but you're recommending we actually increase our reserve. And so do we feel like that minimum level is not viable any longer, or it's just because it's multiple years in a row?
I think, well, moving forward, we always kind of take another whack at looking at what our minimum reserve levels and whether or not they're justified in the way that we currently have them set. The 18.8 is based upon our current methodology, but based upon how things are going, we may look, part of the financial forecast review will be looking at that minimum level and saying, is that enough? Should we be raising that up to something more robust? 18.8 now, maybe we want to have it closer to 20. Maybe when we get to the next year, that we'd be right. We would be below minimum guideline level, if we adjusted it. But and that's an ongoing process every year. We're always taking another look at it and seeing if what we're estimating makes sense. And again, if it's based upon how many days of operating costs we have, if that long run market power price looks to be the sustained new normal, then yes, the minimum reserve levels will by default go up because we'll have to be able to cover that. So
yeah, I mean, I guess one thing I was concerned about, I did want to take a look at alternative one. I know it's just a little bit less, but when energy costs go up, it really helps or is a driving force for a recession. And, if we take that as the time to get even more conservative and raise the rates higher, are we making it harder on everybody? Like obviously is now the time to go up to 5 cents, or just backing it off a little bit to that 0.48. And again, it's really this issue of, well, how much of a reserve is enough? And again, it's kind of a get us over until next year when we look at the base rate increases. So could you talk a little bit about that? And I'm curious, I guess, what Lydia and Eric think about maybe going all the way up to 5 cents, but going up to the 4.8 cents. But I guess you guys put alternative one there in the report. I mean, is that something we can live with?
I mean, I think we can live with any proposal that is put out there, alternative one or two, or something less or something more. But again, where's the comfort level of how much would we like to be sitting at the end of the day, or at the end of FY23? That's the question. Again, I would prefer to have something a little bit more, but if we have something a bit less, that's fine. If but if costs go up even further, that just means that we have more of a constrained problem when we come back to you in 3 to 4 months or 6 months. So that's, it's a comfort level, I think. And everything is an uncomfortable, question at this point with all these proposals, but sure. Comfort's a relative term. But that's really it. So either one are doable. Just where does it place us?
I mean, I get more is better. I mean, but again, it's, we're asking people to pay more at a time when a lot of other costs are going up at the same time. And then again, on hydro, I'm glad you guys are looking at alternatives, but, it's kind of this issue of timing the market. And if we do have some good hydro years and we get out of our hydro contracts, we're going to be kicking ourselves on that too. Yeah, so I don't know. My gut was not to go all the way up to the 5 cents, but to try to ease it in a little bit with the alternative one.
I guess we saw you in June, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess my thought is, if we did either alternative 1 or 2, will we see you again in June next year?
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
what depends on what you mean by we, but okay.
Well, finance committee, or council, whomever.
I think that given because purchase costs are not the only thing that we're going to be facing moving forward. We are going to have good modernization. We're going to have and again, transmission costs continue to go up. That's going on regardless of the hydro situation. We have additional costs that are going to be seen. So when in a few months, I'm fairly certain we are going to see yet another rate increase proposal. But this is specific. This hydro rate adjuster is specifically to cover purchase cost variances. We're going to have to probably raise rates more to cover additional ongoing costs related to capital and operations. So I guess if that's true, are you going to see me again in June? Yes.
Maybe, right?
Yeah, it's very likely. Most likely.
Okay. I think, one of the things that I would say is, I think the general public would also like to know, what is the alternative? Is there thought behind that? So if this is how hydro is going to continue onward, then I do think that people are going to want to know what is our alternative, and what is another way to do this where we're not constantly raising prices. And, it's absolutely amazing that how much lower we are than PG&E, right? But Palo Alton's has been spoiled, with this rate. So it's kind of hard, even with the, increase that is minimal, compared to PG&E, but it's going to be difficult for people to kind of stomach if it continues every so many months that it comes back. So I think having an alternative or a solution where we're reducing on hydro or getting out of it, or what Ms. Daly said, they're exploring geothermal. What does that entail? What is that going to be? That might be something to help kind of ease into this increase.
I guess the only thing I can add to that is that, what's Mayor, is that our base is 50%. It's gonna be really tough. The project that Ms. Daly was talking about, we're looking at, we're probably going to be guaranteed only 10% of the geo, maybe 20. But again, that's only going to be a very small amount off of that 50%. So, I think that there's some alternatives that we're going to have to think about, and how we maybe purchase more of each to offset this, because our base floor is 50%, and that's going to be really tough to replace.
And also, it says on the first page that it keeps on going back to gas powered, right? In order to get the electricity. And if we're really moving towards that sustainability and getting away from that, and the price keeps on increasing, then, I do have concerns whether we can reach that sustainability point that we want to.
Yeah, but that's the collision of these two things, right? It's that, if you want to get away from hydro for the 50%, realistically, the alternative is gas. Okay, but that collides with, the whole. It goes beyond electricity too, because we're trying to get off natural gas and move that to electricity, right? So it's a highly constrained problem,
right? And we can't just look at ourselves in the city getting off gas. It has to be from the main point too, so are we enabling them to keep using gas, to produce the electricity? I think that's what I think about a lot of times. And you're not in an easy position. So thank you for all the work you do. Chair.
On 48 cents versus 50, I could go either way.
Me too, I could go either.
So I'll make the motion that we suggest alternative one, the 4.8 cents hydro accelerator.
Second.
And thank you. And again, I guess no more comments. We can go ahead and vote on it.
Well, I'll make a comment. I'll comment on my second, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think staff would be a little more comfortable with another 2 cents. Given it's a 6-month thing, and you guys are going to be back with more normalization of all this stuff in 6 months. I think this is probably good enough for now.
Yeah, and it's 0.2 of a cent, not 2 cents.
Oh, yeah, sorry. What-
So,
what's a
if you-
decimal place among?
Yeah, so if the clerk could change the motion, it's 4.8. Thank you. And the same thing in there. Okay, 0.048. All right, so I vote yes.
Yes.
Eric, Lydia,
Yes.
okay, thank you. And Eric and I won't see you in 6 months, but maybe Lydia will.
You guys can always come back. We're always working.
All right, so we're on to our last item, which is the wastewater pipe replacement.
Yeah, I think that there should be some staff online.
I am online.
Thank you. There. So utilities is bringing sewer investment needs for the future portion. And we are going to run through a presentation here. Matt Zuka is our assistant director for our water, gas, wastewater operations engineering. And he'll be going over along with, we also have folks from the plant as well with us tonight. So we'll have any kind of questions we'll be able to answer for you. So with that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. And put it in the presentation mode. Can everybody see the screen and hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm running off of 2 laptops here in a conference room at the moment. So good evening, council members. My name is Matt Zuka. I am, as Dean mentioned, the Assistant Director of Public Works, Old Habits Die Hard, Utilities, Water, Gas, and Wastewater, and here tonight to talk about sewer investment needs, along with some recommendations about rate implications and revenue needs as well. I'm here with Lisa Belier, who is a senior resource planner who helped on a lot of the financial information. Sylvia Santos is the engineering manager over the WGW. And then Jamie Allen is online as well tonight. He is the plant manager and speak to any questions that the council might have about the plant and associated costs. So with that, a little bit of background on the collection system itself. It came online in 1898, so it's been around obviously for quite a bit of time, about 216 miles of sewer in total. And since about 1990, the city has been undertaking a CAP infrastructure program to replace some of the older pipe. About 36% or 78 miles of sewer main have been replaced since that time, since the first project in 1992. Looking at the figure on the right, the dark green is the sewer that's been replaced since that program kicked off. But we still have about 138 miles of sewer that left to go until we get to the end of the life cycle and we've replaced everything that was in there originally. So of the 138 miles, basically the majority of it was installed between the 50s and the 70s. It consists of what we call VCP or vitrified clay pipe that we believe has a life expectancy of around 100 years. It's not a magic number. Some might be a little bit less, some might be a little bit more, but that's sort of what we feel is a prudent planning number for replacement of the infrastructure. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about our current rate, but of a mile a year. But simple math, at the current rate, it would be 138 years to replace the remaining pipe. And at that point in time, the oldest pipe would be 190 years old, which sort of basically greatly exceeds that 100-year target. Conclusion really is that the current rate of replacement is really not prudent to sustain. So how did we get here? Well, a couple things. What pipe replacement rate do we need? So to meet the 100-year replacement cycle, we would have to replace the remaining pipe in about 55 years or about 2.5 miles per year. We actually do these projects in an every other format where we're designing 1 year and building subsequent. So it'd be about 5 miles every other year. And at that point, at that rate, the last pipe removed would be about 107 years old. And again, that 100 years isn't a magic number. So we think that this is a reasonable tolerance, if you will, on the target. We have been at 2.5 miles per year in the past, but several things have happened, I think, since the early 1910s. We had staff retirement that affected our ability to deliver some of the projects. We had a couple of large projects that involved the downtown and replacing old ABS pipes on gas sewer side, the gas side, that resulted in us not being able to sustain this. It's sort of been a slow taper. So our current rate of about a mile a year is where we're at with the pre-pandemic. We were gearing up to go and increase the rate pre-pandemic, but obviously the pandemic hit and that impacted a couple of things. It impacted our ability to adjust rates significantly and a few other things. So now that we're getting out of the pandemic, we're sort of back at wanting to get our overall rate of replacement back up to where we think it needs to be. So what do we consider developing some of these costs? Because obviously the big issue here is going to be, the big cost item is going to be the construction side of things. We base the costs on replacing existing sewer with HDPE, which is sort of our standard pipe material, using a couple of construction methods, open trench or pipe bursting. These are costlier in some fashions and in some way compared to others like slip lining. And so we did look at some of these other technologies to see if we could bring some of those costs down. What we found was that the smaller diameter pipes that we have generally in our collection system aren't really conducive to some of these alternative technologies. They tend to restrict diameter of the pipe more so than the larger diameter pipes that they're probably better suited for. And also we found that the alternative technologies don't necessarily have the durability of the new pipe. So we end up with a shorter life cycle for some of those replacements having to come due again, and feel that from a planning standpoint in particular, this is probably the most prudent way to plan the costs and the overall CIP program. We're also going to be continuing to look for long-term solutions to the infrastructure challenges that we have. And if new methods come out that we can build the same pipe with the same type of life cycle for cheaper, we'll obviously explore those. When we're talking rates, we want to obviously be looking at where do we stand right now compared to other utilities, and so some information on that front. On the residential side, we're actually in a pretty good spot, 28% below our comparison cities. On the commercial side, we're slightly above, not a huge amount, but about 8% above. So the comparison cities that we typically compare ourselves to. We did find a 2018 sewer rate study that was put together, that was included in the staff report, and found that of the 25 agencies in that comparison, 22 of them were in San Mateo, 3 in Santa Clara. Palo Alto was the lowest on the single family residential side. So the good news there is that we have some room to work with on the rates when we compare ourselves to some of our peers. We also know that other treatment plants in the Bay are going to be performing upgrades to meet the regulatory drivers on the discharge quality, and that's going to be driving rates up of those peer agencies as well. On the collection system side, we don't really have a good benchmark or comparison to compare ourselves to how other agencies are performing and sort of rehabilitating their mains. It varies so drastically between cities depending on the condition, the rates of new development, rehabilitation methods, and other local factors. But we do know that generally there's going to be an upward pressure on rates when we just look at the significant land costs that obviously the council members are familiar with from what we're facing here in Palo Alto. So how do we fund getting to the 2.5 miles per year? So this is obviously a challenge. We have some unprecedented costs coming on the plant itself. We are now going to be adding on additional expenditures for the collection system side. All of that is while we are recovering from a pandemic. So what you see here in this chart is the financial plan that was presented last year, I believe, and it shows in light blue and light green the operation costs, light blue being the treatment plant operation costs, and the light green, the collection system operation costs. On the dark blue, that's the treatment capital and debt. And as you can see in 2028, that bar expands significantly. That's when we expect to have to start paying back SRF loans for some of the capital projects that are being contemplated at the plant right now. So that's already baked into the financial plan that you have seen previously. Obviously, that would be adjusted based upon actual bid prices, but from what was presented last spring, that was the number. We're not showing any collection system debt, the sort of dark brown bar, because right now the collection system doesn't have any debt associated with it. It's all in a pay-go. And the rates that were projected back in spring were a series of fives dropping off into 3% going into 2030 and beyond. So this is sort of forms the baseline for comparison, as we are already anticipating sort of 5% rate increases over the near horizon. And so how do we fund moving to 2.5 miles per year? We have three options that we've presented and come up with, sort of with option one having a couple of permutations. One is immediately moving to 2.5 miles per year. And by immediate, what we mean is construction in 2024. It'll take us some time to ramp that up, get the rates in place, do the design, and have the funding available to implement the first construction project. Under that immediate scenario, there are a couple of options. One is pay-go financing, where we do that out of cash flow. And that really has the impact of substantial short-term rate increases to generate the cash over the couple of years between now and 2024. Another option in this scenario would be to debt finance that first project and smooth that in a little bit. And we'll sort of show some charts on showing these options. Option number two is to transition to 2.5 miles over a slightly longer period of time. And really the main difference between all of these options, the rate at which we transition to 2.5 mile per year main replacement rate. Under alternative one, the oldest pipe would be 107 years old. And under alternative two, we're not compromising too much on that. We would estimate that it would be 109 years old if we were to sort of slowly transition rates over a 4-year period of time, construction in 2026. And then option three is to transition even more slowly yet with a sewer line, last sewer line replaced of 113 years old, construction starting in 2034. Alternative 1A, the immediate move. This is, as you can see, in 2024 and 2025, we would be double-digit rate increases, 15% in 2024, 12% in 2025 to generate the cash to then pay out the construction project. After that, we would project that we'd have enough revenue and rate increases would then be able to drop to about 4% per year to keep up with ongoing increases in cost. Under this alternative, again, 107 years old is the oldest pipe being replaced. Alternative 1B, and this is where we introduce the collection system debt bar into the chart. It shows smoothing out that the significantly higher rate increases in the first couple of years and debt financing that over time. The last pipe here is still 107 years old, but there are some trade-offs associated with this. Depending upon the type of loan we get, whether it's SRS loans or whether it's bonds, it would have some implications on the total amount of debt that we pay. But we would expect that in 2032, the rates would be higher by 3% when compared to alternatives 1A or 2, just due to the debt issuance. And I'll talk about alternative 2 here in a second. So there is a cost associated with that debt, obviously in the long run, and in the long run, there's also a higher rate implication associated with it. Moving on to alternative 2, this is a transition to 2.5 miles per year over a 4-year period of time. And you can see we've basically dropped the rates, and instead of double digits in the first couple of years, we're talking about 9% rate increases for the first 3, an 8% increase, and then 3 is going on out from there. Under alternative 2, there is no debt issued, and we're only compromising by a couple of years in terms of the overall replacement timeframe of it. And last pipe replaced would be 109 years old. And then alternative 3 basically takes the financial plan chart that I showed at the very beginning and waits until the projected rates are less than 5%, and we start accumulating money at that point in time. Here we're talking about having a construction out in 2034, but maintaining rates all the way to 5%, keeping it at 5%. Last pipe replaced here, and this alternative would be 113 years old. Those are percentages which are somewhat informative, but we thought it would be prudent to look at what the actual dollar value is on a monthly basis to the different accounts. And so you can see here, same information on the upper table that you were shown in the previous charts with alternative 1A and B and the associated percent rate increases by year. In the bottom table is the commensurate actual monthly change to the bill. So this is for residential. And just looking at alternative 1A, even the 15% maximum in fiscal year 2024 results in about a $6.69 impact to the monthly wastewater bill for a residential customer. Down on the lower end, for alternative 2, that would be about a $4 impact. And then even lower yet for alternative 3. But we do actually have, other than not just residential, but commercial and restaurants. And same table at the top here showing percentages. Again, commercial and restaurant being two tables below that. On the commercial side, on average, for alternative 1A, it'd be a $17 a month impact. Alternative 2 would be 10. And then, as you can see, for the restaurants, that's probably where on an overall gross basis, there's the biggest change. It's because their bills are generally higher, given the strength of the wastewater. But alternative 1A would have a $100 impact to the monthly bill, whereas alternative 2, 1D would be 48 and alternative 2 would be 62. So in summary, there are basically 3-4 options. One is immediate, again, looking at time being the primary variable, with 2 options between pay-go and debt financing. So 15% and 12. 7% under a debt financing scenario. And again, rates will be higher in the outer years, just from the fact that we're carrying that debt. Alternative 2 is the transition to 2.5 miles per year over 4 years. 109 years old would be the last pipe replaced. And we'd keep rates to single digits, at least the 9% per year between fiscal year 2024 and 2027. And then finally, option 3 is to transition slowly, construction starting, relatively significantly later, 2034, but it would be keeping rates to a 5% per year increase. So the recommendation, staff's recommendation is alternative 2. We think that this actually strikes a reasonable compromise between our goal to accelerate the replacement schedule, but then not raise the rates too quickly or maybe unnecessarily take on debt. We think that the rates are going to remain competitive compared to our surrounding agencies still, given what we know about drivers on costs, that we're not the only ones facing substantial plant cost increase in collection system improvement needs. 109 years old is a reasonable compromise for replacing the mains. This might require future adjustments. I mean, this is the long-term planning. I will say it's a very nice place to be when we're talking about planning over the entire life cycle of an asset, not just trying to find things to fix out in the system. This option also avoids bond financing, and we think that the 10%, keeping rates less than 10% in the single digits are likely to garner more political support. We're going to continue to look at funding opportunities to offset these costs. Some of the obvious opportunities are the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So we've been looking for grants. We applied for a grant, a $9 million grant for the gas distribution system recently. We're waiting to hear back from that probably early next year in February, whether we were successful in obtaining that. And any funds we get would go in the long term to help offset some of these costs. Some of the benefits of the proposed infrastructure investment. First of all, managing the entire life cycle is, again, it's a great place to be, and it's appropriate to be setting rates to try to plan around that to the extent that we're remaining competitive and all the other factors that go into it. Certainly from an engineering standpoint, we think it's appropriate. We also know that the sanitary sewer overflows that we see are a result of the degraded pipe. So as we allow that infrastructure to age, there's the increased risk sanitary sewer overflows. That can result in sort of not only regulatory action, legal action, other costs. So we think that there's a risk mitigation element to staying on top of the maintenance and the replacement. It also mitigates the impact, some of the impacts of sea level rise. We do know that groundwater levels are going to rise in the future as a result of the increasing levels of increasing sea levels. And that would then translate into increased infiltration into the collection system. Increased infiltration into the collection system results in more water going to the plant, and dealing with those increased flows to the plant is very costly. So there is a mitigating factor to this where, while it's very difficult to quantify, we do know at least qualitatively that there will be a benefit associated with that. Next steps from tonight. So we presented to the UAC in October, and we're here shown in the sort of the bold line on the table, which is the wastewater CIP investment plan. Next, we'll be going back to the UAC, could be December, January timeframe, to present the preliminary financial forecasts, and those financial forecasts will then go back to finance for feedback early next year. And then the rest follows sort of the standard rate approval process, where we're coming back with final financial plans and rates, UAC, finance, and council ultimately approving those in June of next year. So with that, we're requesting tonight is Finance Committee feedback on staff's recommendation of transitioning to 2.5 miles over 4 years. Again, construction in 2026, with some of the details associated with the alternative in the bullets below. And with that, I will end my presentation and turn it over for questions.
And so this is really kind of a study session, right? We're not really looking for a motion, you're just looking for feedback.
Correct. Ultimately, we want to turn this into the financial plans. There'll be other opportunities. There'll be other bites at this apple, basically. So we'll be back with the final financial plans or the preliminary and final over the course of the next 6 months.
And what was the reaction of the UAC when we went there the first time?
Absolutely. So in general, I would say that alternatives one had mixed reception. Some felt that it was a little too high, and everybody that was in attendance was generally supportive of alternative 2. There was, even with the alternative 1 with the bonds, I would say that there was not a strong appetite for going out for debt financing if it was not necessary. And I don't think that we believe that it is necessary in the case, if we can sort of modulate the transition a little bit. Alternative 3 and delaying was not, I think, looked upon favorably.
Great, thanks. Lydia, Eric, you guys want to start?
Well, so the time frame for doing the whole project is going to be 50 or 60 years.
Yeah, so 55 years
everything.
gets us to the end of the remaining original sewer that was put in.
Right.
And then, to a certain extent, it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. We'd be evaluating of the pipe that's been replaced since the 1950s, what of that is still holding up. But of the original infrastructure that was installed, 55 years would basically get us back to square one.
And it's 55 years under all 3 alternatives.
Correct. It would vary a little bit. I mean, the 55 years, sorry, let me be more precise with that. 55 years is sort of the basis of the remaining pipe. If we start in 2034, it gets shifted. It's not quite a 1-for-1 shift, because during that period of time, we're replacing at the 1 mile per year. So it's not like we're doing nothing now, and then we're talking about when we start. We're doing 1 mile per year, and if we start in 2024, then it's versus 2026 versus 2034.
Right. Okay. So there will be a little difference. It'll be 55 or 58 or something like that.
Correct.
But
it's within the accuracy.
75. Sorry.
Yeah, it would be within the accuracy of our ability to predict the life cycle of an actual asset, really.
Okay. Because it looked to me like, at least over the first decade, alternative 2 is actually more expensive overall than alternative 3. And I sort of scratched my head going, why is that? Because we're replacing the same pipes in the same time frame. So why should one cost more than the other? But maybe it equalizes out over time.
It does. So what we're basically doing, is we're using a euphemism, right? We're kicking that can down the road till 2034, and then you're only seeing a chart that looks at the next, until that time frame. The bulk of the costs are off the chart, basically.
Perfect.
So it's really a matter of how quick. That's why the main variable is how quick do we start, right? The net at the end of the day is we have a certain fixed number of miles of pipe that need to be replaced, and we've made assumptions about at 2.5 miles with certain cost inflations for construction and other things. How long would that take us to get there? But yeah, the bulk of work, if you will, that's remaining to be done is probably going to be after I retire. I mean, that's the time frame that we're looking at here.
Right.
And again, that's a nice place to be. Not a lot of cities are in that place where they're thinking about the entire life cycle of an asset. They're more looking at like things that they have to go fix and putting capital programs together to fix those assets. So it's the fact that we're able to be looking at this on an overall life cycle basis is a good thing.
Hey, we're government. We always look at the long term.
Not always. I've worked for some government that doesn't. So,
but anyway, short summary is you think that, you know, integrated over time, there's not a cost difference between alternatives in 2 and 3. It's just a question of timing.
Correct. It's just timing. I mean, obviously there's maybe if you want to get super precise, it's obviously cheaper to do things sooner rather than later when you're dealing with inflation, but absent that variable, which over this time horizon, there's going to be inflation.
Right.
I would say that the costs are, you know, roughly equal.
Inflation impacts both revenues and expenses, of course.
Very true.
When you're looking at 55 years of rate increases, I mean, there'll be other factors, there'll be other rate increases over that period of time.
Well, of course.
Right?
Okay, but
Yeah.
We're engineers. You break it down into one piece at a time.
Exactly. And as I told the UAC, I think I've been doing this for a long time, and I've yet to see a city set rates once and fire and forget and not have to revisit them at any point in the future. So things change.
I thought we always did that.
we did make some, I think, reasonably, what we sort of called prudently conservative or prudently pessimistic, I think was the term I coined, assumptions about construction inflation. We looked at the actual increases in cost that we've seen on CIP projects over the last, you know, over the period of time that we have reasonable data for, which I believe about 10, 12 years. And we're carrying about a 5.4% construction cost inflation number, which obviously given recent CPI inflation doesn't seem like a lot, but you know, we're hoping that that's not going to be sustained and that it would get down to a more reasonable level.
I mean, you know, 100 years sounds like a really long time, but the difference between 107 and 113 seems pretty small. So I'm curious again, why the UAC wasn't, you know, excited about option 3. It doesn't really seem like it's that big a difference when you're talking about this kind of years.
Yeah, and it is a very subtle. I would say that the costs aren't necessarily linear and proportional to the all of this isn't necessarily linear. Let me just say, as we get out into the outer years of the asset, the more likelihood we have that there are going to be other costs that we have to bear around maintenance, around SSOs, around, you know, exposure to litigation or whatever those costs are. And so those outer years are going to be the most costly to the city to maintain and everything else. And also results in, you know, the biggest other sort of intangible impacts that we would have to deal with.
But you're talking about fewer and fewer pipe, like you're talking about the last pipe,
correct.
A lot of pipe, right?
Correct. So it's definitely it is not a lot of extra years in the grand scheme of things, 100% agree. But we are taking it and we're now sort of 13% over, if you will, our desired, you know, lifespan. And those last 5-7 years or whatever they're going to be smaller amount of pipe than we have in the system today for sure. But definitely going to be the most costly in our life cycle to maintain and operate.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
I forgot my question, but I'll go to my next one. So how do you work with you know, the dig once rule? Do you coordinate with other departments? Obviously you have to plan out and design wherever it is that you're going to replace the piping, but how do you coordinate? Do you even coordinate with other departments on trying to dig once and so forth?
Yeah, there's a lot of coordination that goes into that. We don't have joint trenches necessarily, so it's not like we're putting it all into the same, you know, we're not putting water and gas and sewer into the same location. So the dig once part would be more around affecting the street. Generally, we have rules around where we'd like to see utilities within the street. Some might be under the sidewalk, some might be in the center, some up to the side. Where we also do coordinate with Public Works on the paving schedule, making sure that we're not going in and ripping up freshly paved streets, that we're coming in first, and they're coming in after. So, in fact, right now we're working really hard. Sylvia is, I should say, on how we're coordinating with Caltrans on some of the work that they're planning to do on El Camino, and we have a sewer replacement project that we're trying to squeeze in before they start all of their paving efforts there, because we don't want to be, having an SSO occur and we're having to rip up a recently paved street. So there definitely is a lot of planning and coordination. I can't say it's 100% precise and foolproof because things go wrong and break, and so you have to deal with that. But to the best of our ability, we absolutely are.
So the old piping is the clay one. What is the new one?
We're using what's called HDPE or high density polyethylene. We use it for a couple of reasons. That type of material allows us to do pipe bursting, which means that we're digging trenches and we're pulling pipe through underground, and we're breaking the pipe that's in situ as it gets pulled through. So it's a less invasive form, and we can try to do that when we can. Sometimes we can't. We have to open trench things, which is digging, as it sounds. You dig an open trench and you lay the pipe in. The other thing that using HDPE over other types of materials allows us is that we actually use that material on our gas side and on our water side. So we have a consistency and a sort of uniformity as we operate and maintain it for all of our pipe materials. Same technology for fusions, for tapping, for that kind of thing, and our operators are very familiar with it.
And you expect that there will be enough human resources, manpower, womanpower, in order to get this project done in the upcoming years? Or is this a contract out?
We expect to be able to do the design in-house with our internal resources, and then we would be contracting out construction. That's sort of our standard practice for the larger capital projects on the water, gas, and wastewater side. We do have the capacity in-house with our operations crews to do smaller size projects. In fact, like right now, we're planning a gas main replacement on a cul-de-sac where it just doesn't, it's too short of a cul-de-sac, and it's too visible, too much impact for those residents to contract out, and it's not productive, cost effective really for a contractor to do work. And so we decided to have our operations crews take on that project. So smaller jobs, sort of in the isolated pockets, we'll do in-house, but these large ones, we generally will outsource those and bid those for construction. But the design's done in-house for the most part.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It seems like, part of the challenge here is you're locking these long-term, rate increases in all these scenarios, needing to keep, future councils aligned and understanding that this really long program, that's why I still tend to gravitate towards option 3, where you just have like 5% increase every year. I could see something like option 2, and I wonder, when you go back to UAC, if there might be more variations, like spread it over 4 years or spread it over 6 years. I can see us doing option 2, where you just have a couple of years of 9% rate increases. But I think that's going to be the trick, is having the rate increase kind of built in where you can sustain it for a lot of years.
Yeah, and one of the things that we were talking about too is, if we want to, I guess, if you look at alternative 1, that's the let's say politically difficult in the short term, but it solves the longevity issue of keeping future councils sort of going down the same path, because it gets locked in early, and then we're collecting the revenue going forward, right? So that definitely going from there, recognizing that they're double digits, option 2 is kind of the compromise to say, yes, we have some, increased demand on making sure that we're, continuing down this path of 9s for the next 4 years. Option 3 really doesn't get us any more money than we have today, or that we were already planning in our last financial projection until those outer years. So it's starting in 2020, I think it's 2030, if I'm recalling correctly. And so we're really then just deferring that again, same thing, even further down the road, the hope that the future councils will want to increase rates accordingly. So I think our preference would be, that's kind of, I would just say alternative 2 is sort of a balance. It's a balance of a bunch of different things. Probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, option 1's really ripping off the Band-Aid.
Yeah. But you know, you have to bookend these things, right? So, you know, if I just gave you option 2, that would be the bookend.
Right.
No,
Yes.
we got that.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's any other useful feedback we can give you right now. I mean,
I'll throw a little. I'm not. Maybe this is naive, but I'm not too worried about future councils deciding to, let's not do this. I mean, maybe they'll be different than ours, but I haven't seen the councils that you and I've been on for the last 8 years go back and say, oh, let's cut maintenance on core utility stuff beyond what some previous council did. We sort of said, yeah, let's continue that program. It was there for a good reason. So I would sort of expect that future councils would do the same thing. Right?
But if there's a reason for an additional rate increase, now all of a sudden you're looking at a 10 or 12 rate increase, and then they might be like, well, can we back it off?
No, I wasn't arguing for option 1. I was thinking, I was thinking option 3 might be reasonable too, right? That's all.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll add something into that. I mean, one of the things that we contemplated as we were preparing for tonight is that, for example, some of the pricing at the plant has come in higher than anticipated, or that was originally estimated. The good news about that, and we're still working the numbers behind this, but the funding has been locked in on the SRF loan side of this, and Jamie's on the line. He can probably provide any more details on this one. But the benefit of the SRF loan is that it's not due until 2028, which is when these rates are the rates for the collection system side would be tapering off. So to the extent that any adjustments are needed on the currently planned infrastructure work, those would be happening in the outer years and wouldn't tip over the 9s into double digits, at least as we're thinking about things right now. So even though those are short-term costs that are going to have to be borne during construction, the payback on the loans actually coincides quite nicely with alternative 2 and what's been proposed. And I guess if there's no other feedback, what staff would propose is that the subsequent financial plans would then incorporate one alternative, one of the 3, and that what you'd see subsequent to this night's meeting would be a financial plan has one of these alternatives baked in. We can certainly revisit that at a future date. This isn't a final adoption, but rather than carrying multiple options through all of the financial plans.
Yeah, again, for me, I think it's possibly option 2 or somewhere in between 2 and 3. I mean, I am concerned about commercial and restaurants. I mean, those did look pretty massive increases for them. But it seems like you're doing great analysis and thinking about the right issue. So
good.
I think, assuming it's correct that the integration of all the money over time is going to be the same between options 2 and 3. It wouldn't be with option 1 because if it was financed, right? But 2 and 3, then you sort of look at, well, okay, between 2 and 3, what's the difference in risk of having to spend money on repairs or flooding somebody's house, which we have some experience with and so forth. It feels like it's probably not a huge difference between the 2, but sort of that's kind of the things you would knock around, right? To think, so total cost versus time of costs, right? Again, within reasonable bounds.
Yeah, ultimately at this level of planning, it's the rate, right? That's the magic number. Actually tweaking it from 2.5 to 2.6 or 2.4 up and down a little bit could have an implication on costs. So if 9 wasn't the right number, Could it be 2.4? Yeah, it could absolutely be 2.4. It's just not going to meet the objectives that we laid out of trying to replace them within the 100-year time frame.
Right.
But it is really the main variable, as I was sort of pointing out, is time. How quickly do we get to that rate? That's the goal rate, I think, in our mind, because it sort of it's a standard practice that I would say in the industry that the mains are, generally assumed to be around 100 years. Other infrastructure like pumps and whatnot may be closer to 30. So we're trying to sort of balance also what is the generally accepted industry practice. We didn't make that up in a vacuum. But it's also not a hard and fast rule that if you get to 100 101, things start imploding.
No, I think that's right. We got that.
Yeah.
So are you also asking us for what is one of our preference for the financial plan?
Yes.
2. But I can live with 3.
Yeah, I'm like 2.5.
I'm there too at the 2.5. It's nice to have consistency so people know what to expect. But I see where you have to kind of.
I mean, we could show all 9s. That would be consistent. Just kidding.
You could what?
I said we could show all 9s. That would be consistent, but I'm just kidding. I mean, and I think that was one of the options. It was kind of shown in option 1B, but it was shown around the debt financing, right? That was what smoothed that out. There could be an option where we're trying to smooth that out over a longer period of time and still allow us to ramp up more quickly. So I'm going to make this up, for the sake of discussion. But if it was an option, a series of 7s, but then we trade off. Now I've got to keep more years of counsel in alignment with ongoing 7s, and that was sort of the balance that we were trying to strike. Is I think sort of 4 felt more. With anecdata, right, and more experience, 4 felt more like a short-term commitment to then taper off and then to deal with future adjustments as they come up. Balancing it out for 7s over a longer period of time sort of felt like it was a longer tail on the commitment politically to continue to raise rates, and I think that's what we were trying to strike a balance with as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're trying to balance the right things. So. Thanks a lot, Matthew, for the update, and good luck as you go forward, go back to the UAC.
Thank you.
Right, and I think that was our last item. And as Kali said, I didn't see any emails, but all the packets are out. So the next meeting packet is up online.
Chair Boy, sorry to interrupt you. Just a reminder to take public comment on item 4.
Sure. Do we have any? I don't see any attendees.
Yes, there's no one that would request to speak.
Thanks for the reminder. And then, so I don't think we really have anything on upcoming agendas other than we have our next meeting and we have our agenda out.
That's correct. The one thing I will note is there's one late packet item for next week's agenda that will be going out this week. That one item is the pension funding policy recommended revisions. So the long range financial status report is out. The Q1 financial status report is out, as well as a status update, typical information report on the status of any finance committee referrals. All 3 of those reports are out. And so the 4th one will come this week.
Like by Thursday? That's fine.
With the normal packet, yeah.
Great. Awesome. All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good evening. I'm going to go have some lunch.
Thank you all.
Thank you.